We're not some type of royalty in Africa. Just kingsinafrica.com, and the video is right there in the center on the first page, and you can see it there. It's a very needy place. It's a very needy place. It's a very dark place. It's a place with no love. No love whatsoever. There are very prideful people in South Africa. When I was there, I noticed that men don't run across the street. They'll just walk right in front of you, and they'll walk. And I was with Sipo, and I said, Sipo, how come they don't run? How come they just walk and they just stare at you? You have to slam on the brakes, and they just stare at you. They're like no scare. There's no fear. And he said, because men don't run. I said, why? He said, because they might fall. And if they fall, that'd be embarrassing. Yeah. So it's better just not to run. I was like, what happens if you get hit by a car? He said, well, you better hope you die. I was like, that's the craziest thing I'd ever heard. But that's just how they are. They're a very cold place. I was going to talk to you a little bit about reputation. South Africa, it used to have a good reputation. It used to be known as a place that had a lot of natural resources. Diamonds, gold, oil. They used to make more automobiles there than like any other country in the world. I mean, outside of the U.S. I mean, they used to be like a top 5 economy. They were known for a lot of good things. What happened is South Africa has got a bad reputation because of something called apartheid. Apartheid was a segregation system that was set up by the powerful white South African government in the late 1940s, and it ruled and dictated every bit of the people's lives there. No matter what color they were, it ruled and dictated their lives in some shape or fashion. It benefited some more than it benefited others. But ultimately, it just really helped the rich get more wealthy. Whether you were black or white or colored, they have 3 major groups. They have black, white, and colored. They have black is what they consider Africans. It's not a racial term there. It's not racism. It's just it's really who they are. They just consider themselves black. That's the Africans. They have whites. That's the people of European descent. People that look just like you and I. There's over 10 million of them there. They look just like you and I. And then they have what they call coloreds. And coloreds are people that come from both European and African descent. And they are just the mixture of the two. And it is not a racist term. They title one another those things. They look at each other and they profile each other that way. They can look at one another. They know where they come from. They know where they live. They know what language they speak. They speak about 12 national languages. But that system kind of become their reputation. They became known for a civil war that happened in the early 90s. After the Civil War, apartheid fell, the new government was established, and they said, all our problems are solved. Everything's going to be solved. The government's going to help everything. 21 years later, their problems have just gotten worse. A country of 52 million people, over 20% of the population has AIDS or HIV. You're more likely, we talk about, statistics, you're more likely to get AIDS in South Africa than you are to meet a Christian or to hear the gospel preached or to ever hear the gospel. You're more likely to get AIDS. The life expectancy for a female is 46 years of age. For a male is 41 years of age. They have the highest death rate in the country, or in the world. So we don't have a whole lot of time. We've got to get there. But that's the reputation of the people. We all have a reputation. This church has a reputation. Whether you think you don't have a reputation, whether you sit there and you're like, I don't have a reputation, I don't do anything. Can I tell you, your reputation is you don't do anything. And that's it. We all have a reputation, whether we're the quiet guy that never says anything. Guess what? That's what you're known for. We are all known for something. We're known for things that we do. I got a reputation in high school because I was kind of crazy, and I thought I was Spider-Man, and I scaled up a wall one day when the teacher left the room. It was in shop class. It was an exposed steel beam, and I went up the beam, and I thought I was Spider-Man, and I was up there, Spider-Man, and guess what happened? I fell, and I broke both of my arms, and I became known as the kid that broke both his arms. And that became my reputation. And can I tell you what happens with reputations is once you get known for something, people never really forget it. And can I tell you, the people in my hometown, I'm from Social Circle. I went to high school there, little bitty, teeny tiny town. It's gotten much bigger than it used to be. But it's just this little country town, and can I tell you, those people in that city, they never forgot it. You know, I look at them, I say, that's 17 years ago. I got over it like within 2 months. After I got the cast off, I was over it. They never get over things like that. My grandmother, when she was 4, she fell in a chimney. And she got the nickname Smuts. And can I tell you what happened with that nickname is they still call her that. Everybody that was alive when that happened is now dead. But yet she's still known for falling in the chimney, and everybody calls her Smuts. Crazy, crazy, crazy story. It's just how it's weird how we get these things. We get these things that kind of identify us. We get these things that people know us for. We kind of get these reputations. Sometimes it can be good things. There's a man in my home church. His name is the Candy Man, and he got that reputation. You know why? Because he passes out candy to little kids when they come into church. He's known as the Candy Man. That's a good thing to be known as. Breaking your arms is a bad thing to be known as. A country with a lot of social issues, that's a bad thing to be known as. But a country that sends a lot of missionaries, that's a good thing to be known as. And in Acts chapter number 9, we find a story of a lady. It's a lady. I know it's kind of weird, a missionary preaching on a lady, speaking on a lady. We find a story of a lady that has a good reputation within her community. You know what she's known for? Loving people. She's known for just loving people. And that's what she's known for. She's known for loving a certain type of people, and she loves people that nobody else cares about. She loves people that everybody else kind of looks down upon. But when she sees them, she sees what Jesus can do with them. Hey. And she spends time to them. And she gives to them. And she develops relationships with them. She becomes kind of important to them. It's the story of Tabitha. So let's hop in. We're going to pick up at verse number 30. I'm in the wrong. I opened up to Corinthians, and I was like, look down. I'm like, uh-oh. That's not the right spot. So let's open up to Acts chapter number 9. Let's look at Acts chapter number 9. We're going to pick up in verse number 36. We're going to read through verse number 42. And it says, and I'll just read it. It says, now there was at Joppa a certain disciple named Tabitha, which by interpretation is called Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and alms deeds which she did. And it came to pass in those days that she was sick and died. And when they had washed, they laid her in an upper chamber. Forsomuch as night was night at Joppa, the disciples had heard that Peter was there. They sent unto him 2 men, desiring him that he would not delay to come to them. Then Peter arose and went with him. And when he was come, they brought him into the upper chamber. And all the widows stood by him weeping and showing the coats and the garments which Dorcas made while she was with him. But Peter put them all forth, kneeled down and prayed, and turning him to the body said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up, and he gave her his hand and lifted her up. And when he had called the saints and widows, presented her alive. And it was known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. You know, this is such a great story. It's a story that I have actually missed many, many times. I've read the book of Acts about a couple of years ago. I told this guy he's a missionary going to Morocco. I told him I wanted to be a missionary, and he started quizzing me on the book of Acts, and I didn't know anything he was talking about. I'd read the book of Acts, but I really noticed, he said, you're going to be a missionary, and you don't know the book of Acts. I was like, man, you're right. So I began to study the book of Acts and to read the book of Acts and try to become very familiar with the book of Acts, because you know what? It's my favorite book of the Bible now, because it's action-packed. It's got the church alive. It's got the church in motion. It's the building blocks of missiology. It's the building blocks of what I want to do with my life. So I read this story so many times and I missed over it. And then one day I was reading. I said, wow. Every time I would read it before, I'd be like, that Peter, he's a great guy. That Peter, man, he came from there and he left. And then I started realizing, I started thinking, you know what? Peter really isn't the hero of the story. He's not. He's not even the second hero of the story. The first hero of the story is Jesus, because he's the hero of every story. Hey. Jesus is the hero of every story. He's the hero of your story. He's the hero of my story. And if anything happens in South Africa, you know who's going to be the hero? Jesus. It will not be Jason. It will be Jesus. And I started saying, I said, well, if Peter isn't the second hero, then who's the second hero? And the second hero would be Dorcas or Tabitha. And I started reading and I started researching, you know, and it's such a great story because she's just a lowly woman. Oh, she's probably a widow herself. Because she has so much sympathy toward widows, toward people that don't have anybody else. And I believe she was a woman that did not have anybody else, but then she found somebody. Then she found Jesus, and her life completely changed. And she began to serve there at the church in Joppa, and she began to do things to the other women like her other friends. I believe she was a widow that had something a little bit different. I believe she was a widow that had ability to make a living, and what she did was she made clothes. She was a seamstress. She was a tailor of some sort. She had money. And she didn't just keep her money. She didn't just save her money. She invested her money in the Lord and in the people that needed Him. That's what she did. And she took her money and she would make clothes, and she gave of herself, and she became a very important lady in that community and in that church. Well, what happened was this woman got sick. The Bible doesn't tell us what her illness is, but she got sick very quickly and she died very quickly. And her life was gone. She had been dead, and they were following the traditional, it says the other disciples, it's talking about the leadership in the church, because she didn't have anybody else. They were following the traditional customs for burial, and she was a Jewish woman, so they were following the traditional Jewish customs for burial, which was to take the body, wash the body, pour some ointment over the body, clothe the body, wrap it in the clothing, carry the body through the streets, hire some professional mourners, some professional criers, some professional musicians. I have 2 little girls that would make excellent professional criers. Just a side note. Hire these professionals to do these things. They would have the funeral, and they would come back all within 6 to 8 hours of death. Sometimes somewhere between 4 and 12 hours of death is what they would follow. And if you read the Bible, if you look there in verse number 37, it says, "And it came to pass in those days that she was sick and died, whom when they had washed." It's like they had washed her. They were about to follow through with the procedures, and they stopped. Because they couldn't go forward. They needed her. She was so important to them that they needed her. They couldn't just hop over. They couldn't just skip it. They couldn't just go forward. They needed her. So for a few days, she sat there. And she began to stink, and the disciples were sitting around. They had heard that Peter was nearby, not far away. So they sent Peter out to go get him. They sent 2 men to go retrieve Peter, to go collect Peter, and go beg Peter to come back. So these 2 men, they run down to the city of Lydda. They get Peter. And Peter comes back. He doesn't make haste. He drops what he's doing and he leaves immediately. And when he gets him back, he tries to get into the church, and he can't even get into the church. You know why? Because all the people that Dorcas helped were standing there mourning her. It was a selfish mourning. They weren't mourning her because she did so much for the Lord. They were mourning her because they needed her to go on. It was a selfish thing. They wanted her back, and they were crying, and Peter can't even get into the church. So Peter does something that's really cool. He follows what he had seen Jesus do. He follows the way that Jesus did with Jairus' daughter. He sends everybody out of the room. He sends them all out of the room. He sends them all out of the church. Then he goes, and just like Jesus did, he kneeled down. And he prayed to God. And he asked God to raise Dorcas from the dead. And then Dorcas was raised from the dead. And then he calls everybody together, and he presents her to all the widows, and he presents her to all the other disciples. He presents her to her pastor and all the church members, and they have, I believe, the greatest church service ever had that evening. They were rejoicing because their friend was alive. They were rejoicing because their fellow church member was alive. They were rejoicing because the woman that took care of them was alive. And the next day, that story, they leave that evening, and the next day they go throughout the town of Joppa. And they're telling everybody. And guess what happens? People get saved. People get saved. Now, there are some characteristics that I want us to look at this lady. Number one, I want us to look at her identifying characteristic. The identifying thing. What identifies her? How do they identify her? Whenever they introduce somebody in the Bible, they always give us something to identify them by. They always do. They give us a location. They give us a body of water. They give us an occupation. They give us a parent, a mom, a dad, a grandfather. They always give us something to identify this person with. In my home church, there at Victory, we have 3 men named David White. They're all 3 named David White. It's not spelled differently. It's spelled the exact same. And this is how we identify them. We have David White the plumber, David White the electrician, and David White Jack's dad. That's how we identify them. And whenever we need anything from them, I would always say, which one? And my pastor would say, well, the electrician. Or let's call the plumber. Or let's call Jack's dad. That's kind of how I separate them. That's how we identify those people. Let's look at how they identified Dorcas in the Bible. It says, now there was at Joppa a certain disciple. What is her identifying characteristic? She is a disciple. Jason, what is really a disciple? You know what? A lot of times we think of a disciple, we think of Jesus' 12. And those are disciples. But can I tell you that if you're saved, you are commanded to be a disciple. You have 2 things. You can be a disciple or you can be disobedient.
Right.
Those are your 2 choices. You accept Christ, you can be a disciple or you can be disobedient. There's no difference between a Christian and a disciple. We are called to be disciples. That's what we're called to do. And I don't have my watch on. That's what we're called to be, our disciples. This was her identifying characteristic. So what is a disciple? A disciple is this right here. Somebody that's made a decision. Somebody that has made a decision to follow a certain teacher. Now, can I tell you something about this decision? This is a permanent decision. You know how sometimes we make decisions and we kind of go back and forth on the decision to do this or not to do this? Well, this isn't a back and forth decision. Because if you're back and forth, you're being disobedient. This is a permanent decision. This is something you take in your mind and you said, I'm going to follow Jesus Christ. That was the decision that Dorcas had made. She had made a decision to follow a teacher. She made a permanent decision to follow a teacher. And once you make that decision, you have to begin to memorize that teacher's words. So you begin memorizing, you begin studying that teacher, what that teacher says. You begin studying the notes and taking notes and what he does. And after you start memorizing, then you start learning his way of ministry. You start learning the way he does things. Then after that, you start learning, then you try to start imitating him. You try to start acting like him and carrying yourself as he carries himself. And then number 5, to complete the circle, you start raising up your own disciples. And that's what a disciple is. That's what a disciple does. And that's who Dorcas was. This word right here, it says, now there was at Joppa a certain disciple. It means, it's the only time this word, it comes from the Greek, it's mathetreia, and it means lady pupil, female pupil, girl student. That's what it means. That's what it stands for. She was a disciple, and she's one of like only 10 people outside of the original 11 that is referred to as a disciple in the Bible. There's something special about her. She studied God's ways, and can I tell you that motive, that relationship with Jesus Christ, her being a disciple, was the motor behind everything that she did. It was what pushed her, it was what propelled her to do what was right, to do what was right, to be a servant to people that are hard to be servants to. It's what pushed her. It's what drove her. Because you know why? Because she was imitating Jesus. There's one thing, you read the Gospels, you know Jesus loved people.
Right.
He loved, who did he love? He loved the sinners. He loved the prostitutes. He loved the tax collectors. He loved the soldiers. He loved the most wicked among the bunch. And he loved them. And he served them.
Yes.
And he did things for her. And she was following his example. It was her identity. Her identity was in Christ, and it was everything. Her relationship was the source of every good thing that she did. She had the proper private relationship with her Savior, and it affected her public ministry. So my first question is, are you a disciple? Are you a disciple? Have you made a decision? And are you imitating Jesus Christ? Are you studying his way of ministry? Are you studying what he said? Are you trying to live like he lived? And are you making more disciples? Are you a disciple? Number 2, we saw her identity was in Christ. Number 2, she was important. You know, there's one thing I've noticed is I'm very young. I'm 33 years old. But I've been around. I was in the workforce for 10 years. I was a sales rep for a building supply company. And there's one thing that I've noticed is people want to feel needed. Anybody ever notice that? That everybody wants to feel needed? You want to feel needed?
Right.
I've worked with a couple men that would create problems so they could fix them where they felt needed. You ever worked with anybody like that? I worked with a guy, and he would create a problem, and for a long time, I thought, man, that guy is awesome. Then one day, it hit me. I said, who created this? I said, well, Rick did. Well, who fixed it? I said, Rick did. Well, he did the same thing last week, and the week before that. He creates problems just so he can fix them, so he can feel needed. We all have that in us. We want to feel needed. We want to feel wanted. If not, just your children are that way. You ever notice how my kids, they love feeling needed? Can I tell you, Dorcas achieved that by just serving Jesus? She was needed, number 1, she was needed by her church. She was needed. I've only been in the ministry for 5 years, but I've seen a lot of funerals, and the saddest type of funeral I see are the funerals where nobody shows up. And I know we think that's funny, and it is kind of funny, but the truth is that happens. And it's very sad to me. Because that person didn't affect anybody. That person did nothing for no one. That person, no one cared for because they didn't care enough for them. And it's very, very, very sad to me. Can I tell you that wasn't the case? She passes away, and guess what happens? Her church is moved to action. They needed her. They couldn't go on without her. They needed her, so what did they do? They sent 2 men to go get Peter, because they knew he would know what to do. They were going to bury her. They were going to take her down They were going to take her down and follow the traditions. But they couldn't, because she was important to them. She was needed by them. They were moved to action. Question number 2. Are you needed by this church? Are you needed by your pastor? Or when you die, will they just keep going on without you? You know, it doesn't matter how old you are, you still can be effective for Jesus Christ.
Yes.
You still can be effective with your family. I had a great-grandmother, 102 years old. She was blind and she couldn't see. She couldn't hear very well. But can I tell you, up until about the last 2-3 weeks of her life, she prayed for every one of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren by name. Every one of them, she prayed. She prayed for them. That meant something to me. You know, you can pray. Are your prayers needed here? Or can you just die and us not miss you? When I was working at the building supply company, there was a man named Mark Bearfield, and he was a great man. I loved him very, very much. He was a good man. He had taught me a lot of things, and he passed away. All of a sudden, I dropped him off at the doctor's office on a Wednesday afternoon. And he said, "Jason, I'll see you in the morning. I'm going in here to get a purple pill." He thought he had heartburn. His car was in the shop. I dropped him off at the doctor's office. He said, I'll see you in the morning. Got home and getting ready to go to church. He got a call. He died in the waiting room, from what I understand. 51 years old. 51 years old, died all of a sudden. And the next day at work, we were lost because he ran the business. He did everything. We didn't know the passwords. We didn't know anything. And he was missed greatly for months to come until we found replacements to do all the things that he did. Are you that type of member here? Are you that type of Christian in the community? Not only was she missed by her church, she was also missed by those that she helped, by those that she served outside of church. They try to come into the church, Peter and the two men, and they can't even get in the church. Why? Because of all the widows showing the coats and the garments that Dorcas made. Who needs you? Would you be missed? Or would the church just keep going on without a beat? Where are you with that? What's your position? So number one, we see her identity. Number two, we see that she was important. And finally, and this is the last one, number three, she had impact. She had impact on her church people, on the people that she served with. She had impact on those that she served outside her church. And she had impact on the lost. Let's look at verse number 42. And it was known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. You know what happened? People got saved because of her story. We all have a story to tell. We all have a story to tell. We all have something that we've done. We all have some ability that God has given us. We all have some occupation that we can do for God's glory. Do all things unto God. Do all things for the glory of God. We all have something. There's something that every single one of us can do. The question is, will we do it? Will we do it? Will we use what we have to affect those, or will we use what we have to just affect us and help us? I'm going to close with this point. This point right here, this point. I know some of you are sitting there and you're saying, Jason, you don't know what I've done. You don't know where I've been. You don't know all the evil things that I was and all the bad things that you did. I don't. I do not know those things. Can I tell you, I don't even care. I don't care the bad things you did. Because I'm just as wicked as anybody sitting in here. But can I tell you what I do know? If you let it. The same God that raised Dorcas from the dead will come into your life.
Yes.
And will totally transform you.
Amen.
And will totally change your life if you'll just let it. If you'll just ask it. No matter what we've done, Jesus can cover it all. Jesus will cover it all. If we just ask Him. Eyes closed and heads bowed.